8.3 Administering fitness tests. So before testing, not only did I look back on previous information gathered from the health screening questionnaire, but I also went into further detail and did another slightly shorter consultation and profiling of the client to gather a kind of indication towards their actual role in the sport and how that would affect their fitness tests and perhaps where they'd want to go after fitness testing and how they'd want to make improvements. So as you can see here, the client's main sport is rugby, and they actually participate in that regularly, which I gathered from the previous consultation. From this consultation here, you can see that they play as an outside centre, which involves lots of passing and making sprints down the wing as opposed to the more defensive side to rugby. So obviously for that would entail speed, agility, power, cardiovascular endurance, and strength. And those are fitness components that I not only relate to the sport and to that position, but ones that the client also relates to, and those were the first components that the client thought of, and the most important ones that they feel for the sport and for their position. So you notice here that speed is a weakness for the client. Now, this is obviously a matter of opinion during this consultation. This is what the client feels is a weakness of theirs. And this may not reflect in their tests, which is why we do the testing, to see if that's actually a weakness or not. I also asked the client what standard or level they play at, and they said that they play at both college and club level. So they play inside college and outside, which would suggest higher levels of fitness due to the regularity of that exercise. In addition to this, if they're doing fitness testing and I'm giving them recommendations or perhaps even suggestions for training, and I need to know where they want to go with this and where they want to go in their sport. So when I asked the client that, they said that they were happy to play rugby for fun because they enjoy it and it gives him a sense of satisfaction in playing rugby and having that competitiveness. But if possible, he would like to go down the route of becoming professional. So that would imply that not only does he have a strong work rate, if he's willing to go to that extent, he obviously feels that he can work hard to get there. But it also shows that the recommendations perhaps need to be adjusted so that he can make those improvements in larger abundances. So from both those consultations, so that's the one from the health screening and the one from this administering fitness tests, I determined 6 tests that I felt would relate to his sport and the progressions that he wants to make and the components of fitness that both he and I felt were key to his position and his sport. So you can see here that the 6 tests that I chose were the yo-yo test, the 30-metre sprint, the Illinois agility test, standing broad jump, hand grip dynamometer, and the 1-minute sit-up test. So in general for all of these tests, the equipment that I needed was cones, a tape measure, a timer, the actual hand grip dynamometer, a mat for the sit-up test, and obviously the recording for the yo-yo test. So the yo-yo test was obviously done for aerobic endurance or cardiovascular endurance. The 30-metre sprint was to measure speed. The Illinois agility was obviously to measure agility. Standing broad jump was power in the client's legs. Hand grip dynamometer measured strength. and the 1-minute sit-up tests measures abdominal muscular endurance. When it actually came to testing the client, obviously I had to read each of the protocols that you can see on the screen currently, and inform them of what they'd actually be doing, so that when it comes to the testing, they can perform the test with complete fluidity and have a complete understanding of what they're putting themselves through, so that if they wish to back out, they can. And in relation to this, I also performed an informed consent and health screening / Part Q questionnaire for the client to ensure that they had a full understanding of what they'd be putting themselves through and letting them know that they can back out if they wish to. So this was in paper form that they actually answered this, and that actually showed that they had no history of illnesses or heart problems or anything, and no current injuries or illnesses, which is obviously really good because it means that we can go forward with the testing without that extra worry. They also did sign the informed consent, which I have in paper form stored away. Obviously, there are particular protocols for the tests which were displayed previously, and there are many other external factors that can affect the testing and which will have a knock-on effect and perhaps change the way that the test has to be done, or change the circumstances so that you cannot actually perform the test. One of these reasons might be illness. So obviously if the participant is ill, they're not going to be able to perform at their best. And actually, if they did go ahead with testing, then it could potentially make that illness worse. So it wouldn't be worth risking it, so you wouldn't test in that case. You also wouldn't test if there were poor weather conditions. So if we were testing outside, perhaps doing the yo-yo test outside, because that's often done to replicate the environment of the sport. But if it was poor weather conditions, such as if it was raining, then you again wouldn't test because it becomes dangerous and the client could slip and injure themselves. This obviously relates to injury, so the client could easily pull an injury before the test or even within the test. Either way, you would terminate the testing and wouldn't carry on because it risks making that injury worse. Finally, if your client feels uncomfortable, and this could be physically or mentally, so if they change their mind and they feel that they don't want to do the testing anymore, you would terminate testing there and you wouldn't force them to carry on. My client didn't have any of these issues and was happy to go ahead with the testing, which we did. Obviously, you also have to perform a risk assessment before testing. There are many risks that could occur during testing. So this includes a slippery floor or any kind of foreign object on the floor that the client could slip on. It's particularly a high risk in the Illinois agility test that they will perform and in the yo-yo test, as the client could very easily trip or slip on something on the floor, leading to injury. So to control that, obviously, I ensured that the floor had been thoroughly swept and that the client was wearing appropriate footwear. The likelihood of this occurring is a 1, the outcome is also a 1, and the risk rating is also a 1. The actions necessary that I took was that I checked the floor before each test, not just before all of the testing and then getting on with them all. I checked before each and every individual test. In addition to this, another hazard is injury from the tests. So to prevent this, warm-up and cool-down should take place before testing and after testing to minimise any potential injuries. The likelihood is a 1, the outcome is a 2, and the risk rating is a 2 for this. And the actions necessary is that I had a first aid kit readily available throughout the whole testing in case injury did occur, so that I could tend to it instantly. And also that thorough warm-up of the required muscles that would be used in the testing. Finally then, dehydration is also another hazard that I had to be aware of. This is very specific to the yo-yo test because it's the only one really that should be dramatically affected by dehydration. Of course the others would be also, but the yo-yo test would be affected the most. So to control this, I had water readily available at all times throughout the testing, so the client could ask at any point and they would have water readily available to them. The likelihood of dehydration occurring is a 1, outcome is slightly more extreme than that of like the slippery floor, so is a 2, and the risk rating is also a 2. So the actions I took to actually regulate this was enforcing regular hydration throughout the tests, so making sure that they took a bit of water each time before each test. So if we move on to why I actually chose each test, then I can look at how each test replicates sporting and fitness components that the client actually requires in their sport. So obviously, as a rugby player, you need aerobic endurance. This is so that they can continue for the whole game, as a rugby game is 80 minutes. Furthermore, I felt that the yo-yo test was best suited to measure the client's aerobic endurance, because I feel that it replicates a game situation and a team sport much more than that of the bleep test, or the multi-stage fitness test, as it should rightly be called. I felt that it was most valid to the aerobic endurance that my client would have because it replicates the conditions very closely of the sport that he plays. Rugby will have intervals of short bursts where you're having to run quickly and sprints and even just jogs, and it will also have those rest periods. There are times where play stops and you have that kind of point of recovery, which is why I felt that the yo-yo test was perhaps the most suitable test for my client, because it has that 5 meters at the end where you recover. In addition to this, the yo-yo test has readily available normative data to compare the results to. So this makes it very easy to compare the client's results to other people's results and get an idea of where they're at, whether they are average or poor or good or above average. Like, it gives an indication as to where they are at. The yo-yo test is obviously also very easily accessible and has a very low cost, as you only need the recording and tape measure and cones, really. The recording can be found online for free. Cones aren't that difficult to buy, aren't that expensive, and neither are tape measures. So it makes it really easy to access and purchase.